There is a kind of heartbreak that hides in the silence, not the screaming kind, not the one that ends in slamming doors or final texts, but the kind that unravels you in stillness. It lingers in unspoken pauses. It doesn't end with goodbye. It begins after. It begins the first time you say something only she used to laugh at, and no one does. It begins when her name shows up in someone else's mouth. It begins when you're no longer hers, but the world still hasn't told your heart. This isn't the kind of grief people write movies about. It's the quieter kind. The kind queer hearts know too well, because when your love wasn't loud to begin with, your loss becomes a secret funeral. She never said she stopped loving, she just stopped calling. She stopped calling you baby, mine, safe. She vanished in small ways before she ever left completely. And that's the cruelest part, isn't it? Because you can't mourn someone who never fully left. And you can't let go of a title she gave you, especially when it was the only one that ever felt like home. You've felt it too, haven't you? The way your stomach turns when someone says her name casually at brunch, like she wasn't once your entire reason for getting out of bed. The way the memory of her hand brushing your cheek shows up out of nowhere, in the middle of the cereal aisle. The way you find her hoodie still folded at the bottom of your laundry bin, and suddenly you're 18 again, closeted, terrified, and aching for someone who made you feel seen. She called you hers. And you built a life around that word. Not a loud life. Not a public one, maybe. But a life nonetheless. Built in glances, in midnight drives, in playlists only the two of you understood. And then she stopped. And now, every day after, you collect the echoes of who you were when she still claimed you. It's not just about the breakup. It's about the quiet grief of not being chosen, of being unheld, unpicked, unnamed. The first moment that broke you might have been stupid, something small. A shared mug that disappeared. A toothbrush left behind. The final Spotify login where you realize she changed the password without telling you. Little things, right? But they weren't little to you. They were anchors. Because when someone is your safe space, their leaving isn't just absence. It's disorientation. Your nervous system doesn't know how to breathe without their voice. Your shadow self starts whispering again, louder than before. You weren't enough. You're always too much. This is what happens when people see the real you. But you were real. You were loving in the only way you knew how. You were soft in a world that taught you softness was dangerous. You let her in. You cracked open the parts of yourself you never let anyone else touch. And now you're alone with the wreckage. Worse than alone, you're haunted. There's no closure in queer breakups when the love was hidden. There's no community funeral when your grief is invisible. You don't get casseroles and condolence calls. You get silence. You get ghosted by your own memories. And yet, there's beauty here. Not the kind you want, but the kind that saves you. Because when she stopped calling you hers, you were forced to start calling yourself mine. You had to look into the mirror and reclaim the parts she named. You had to rewrite the love letter, this time to yourself. And maybe it doesn't feel like healing yet. Maybe it still feels like ache, like longing, like shadow. But the queer heart that heals doesn't shrink. It expands. Even through grief. Even after love. Especially after love. The second quiet moment that broke you came with the first untouched Sunday. No text that morning. No sleepy voice note. No vague plans about getting coffee and walking through the park. Laughing at dogs that looked like their owners. Just nothing. A silence so full it echoed louder than her presence ever did. You woke up expecting her. Not just her body but her rhythm. The way she used to hum tunelessly in the kitchen. How she always overwatered the plants but still called it love. You listened for footsteps that never came. You brewed coffee for two and poured one down the sink. The silence sat across from you at the breakfast table, wearing her favorite oversized hoodie like a ghost who hadn't figured out it was dead yet. You scrolled, mindlessly, looking for traces, story post, a tagged photo, even a vague quote that might feel like her. But she wasn't posting. She wasn't mourning. She wasn't breaking. Not like you. You want to believe she misses you. You want to believe she wakes up with your name caught in her throat. But the truth is, some people leave clean. They untangle themselves overnight. And you? You're still sitting with the knots, blaming yourself for the string. Because you believed it when she said you were sensitive. You swallowed your needs like pills. You turned down your joy because she said it was too much. You adjusted the volume of your entire self to fit her comfort. That wasn't love. That was quiet control wrapped in compliments. That was gaslighting dressed in affection. And the hardest part? She may not even know she broke you. Not really. Because the world doesn't teach us how to see queer heartbreak. It doesn't teach women how to spot emotional violence when it looks like softness. It doesn't teach non-binary lovers how to hold themselves when their partners disappear without slamming the door. But you're learning now, aren't you? You're learning that love that asks you to become less is not love. That you're too much is code for, I can't hold you the way you deserve. That when she said I love how free you are, what she really meant was I'll try to cage that freedom until it makes sense to me. You see it now. The patterns. The way she made you feel like you were losing your mind right before, pulling you in with a kiss and saying, you know I only want the best for you. The affection that always came after the coldness. The I'm just tired. That became her excuse for disappearing whenever your needs surfaced. You see it now and still it hurts. Because even when love is manipulative, it doesn't mean your feelings weren't real. Even when she made you question your memory, your sanity, your sense of self, you loved her. And that love was real too. That's what makes healing so confusing. You're grieving a person who didn't always exist the way you thought she did. You're mourning a fantasy with fingerprints. You're trying to forgive someone who isn't even asking for it. But somewhere in the mess, you begin to ask the real questions. What if the problem wasn't you being too sensitive? What if it was her being too afraid to meet you there? What if your softness wasn't the reason she left, but the mirror she couldn't bear to look into? What if the truth is this? She didn't leave because you were too much. She left because you were starting to realize you were enough. And she didn't know how to love someone who didn't need fixing. Only loving. The third quiet moment that broke you came not with a bang, but a memory. Uninvited, disorienting, soft as a whisper and cruel as truth. It was late. You were folding laundry. A small act of reclaiming order, of proving you still existed in a world that no longer revolved around her orbit. And then it happened. You found her sock. Not both, just one. Buried at the bottom of the clean pile, faded from too many washes, stretched out like the version of yourself you became for her. And suddenly everything inside you unraveled. Isn't it strange how grief hides in the smallest things? Not the big dramatic gestures, not her laugh, not the taste of the lipstick she never wiped off your cheek, but a sock, a fragment, proof that she lived in your space, your drawers, your rituals. She used to laugh when you did the laundry, calling it your quiet superpower. You thought it was intimacy. She thought it was convenience. And in the wreckage, you're left sorting through the difference. You sat down on the floor, holding that orphan sock like it was a relic, a memory stitched into cotton. And you didn't cry. Not at first. You just felt the kind of ache that lives in the bones, the kind that makes you question if healing is even real or just another story we tell ourselves so we can get out of bed. Because this was the third breaking. The realization that she was everywhere and nowhere all at once. Still inside your home. Still inside your language. Still inside the version of you that flinches when the doorbell rings too late at night. You began to understand something no one ever tells you about gaslighting. It doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it's gentle. Sometimes it comes with long hugs and forehead kisses and words like, you're imagining it. Sometimes it's the way she told stories so often you started forgetting your own. You stopped trusting your memory. You started apologizing before speaking. You learned how to read her moods better than your own. And now, even in her absence, you still perform the rituals of fear. Still ask yourself, was I too much? Did I misread? Did I overreact again? You didn't overreact. You adapted. You built your body around her silence, your voice around her approval, your queerness around her expectations. And maybe that's why the sock broke you. Because it wasn't just hers. It was the you that only existed in her presence. The version of yourself you became to survive her mood swings. The you who thought shrinking was safer than being seen. But here's the thing. She's gone. And the space she left behind is terrifying. Yes, but it is also yours. Yours to reclaim. Yours to re-inhabit. Yours to redecorate with the truth you were always too afraid to say. You made me feel like love was something I had to earn. You don't owe her silence anymore. You don't owe her the version of you she tried to sculpt from guilt. You don't owe her the echo of yourself that still apologizes in empty rooms. And as you toss that sock into the trash, Not out of anger but out of quiet release something shifts. Grief doesn't vanish, but it makes room. For breath. For softness. For the realization that you've started referring to her in the past tense. Not as an act of bitterness but as a boundary. She is not yours. You are not hers. And that is perhaps the most radical kind of healing. The fourth moment broke you in a place no one could see. Not in your voice, not in your eyes but somewhere beneath the skin, like a shadow stitched to your spine. It happened while grocery shopping. Of all things. There was nothing dramatic about it. Just the fluorescent hum of a quiet aisle. The soft crackle of packaging. The sound of your own breath echoing in the vastness of a place you once visited together. Your hand hovered over the brand of oat milk she always loved. You stared at it. And for a second, a tiny, aching second, you almost reached for it. But then you remembered. She's not here. She hasn't been. And she won't be coming back for oat milk, or your hands, or your laughter softened by domesticity. That was the moment. When you realized how deeply she had lived in you. Not just in the memories or the shared playlists but in your habits. Your rituals. The way your body reached for her even in her absence. It wasn't love. Not entirely. It was conditioning. It was the result of weeks, no, months of twisting yourself to fit the shape she wanted. She didn't ask. She implied. With sighs. With subtle remarks. With eyes that looked disappointed even when her mouth smiled. You learned to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. To decode the tone behind the words. To carry the weight of her silence like an offering. This is what gaslighting does. It erodes the center of you until you second-guess even the way you exist in a grocery aisle. You don't realize it's happening. You just start doubting your preferences. You stop choosing for yourself. You become a mirror. Polished. Reflective. Empty. And standing there, your hand frozen midair, you remembered all the small ways she trained you to disappear. You're too sensitive. Why are you making everything about you? Don't be dramatic, it was just a joke. You're remembering it wrong. Each phrase a thread, unraveling you from your own truth. And yet she called it love. She wrapped manipulation in softness, called your confusion intimacy, taught you that survival was the same as connection. But now here you are awake. Alone, yes, but sovereign. And in this moment, standing in the dairy aisle, you make a different choice. You leave the oat milk. You walk past it deliberately. Not to erase her, but to reclaim the smallest act of agency. You pick the brand you liked before she arrived, before your taste was treated like a flaw to be corrected. Because that's what healing is, sometimes. It's not grand. It's not cinematic. It's quiet, ordinary rebellion. Choosing yourself in moments where you once forgot you had a choice. You don't cry. You don't shatter. You simply feel it, the weight of it all, and keep moving. But when you reach the checkout line, you pause again. You notice the way your chest tightens as the cashier asks how your day's going. You want to say, I'm fine. But instead you say, it's been a heavy one. And there's a kind of power in that, too. Not oversharing. Not collapsing. Just telling the truth without apology. Because your silence was never the problem. It was the way you were taught to make yourself small within it. Now you're learning to speak. Even if the words tremble. Even if no one understands. Even if healing still feels like walking barefoot over glass. This is your story now. Not hers. Not the version of you she sculpted with guilt and half-truths. Yours. And with every oat milk you don't buy, with every breath you take that doesn't require permission, you stitch yourself back together. Not the same. Never the same. But real. And that is more than enough. The fifth moment was the quietest and the loudest. It didn't come with a text or a call, or some final message you could point to and say, this is where the story ends. No, it came in silence. In the still air of a morning that looked like every other. You were folding laundry. That's all. A pair of jeans, some soft cotton shirts, socks that never seemed to match. The hum of the dryer still warm in the background, sunlight bleeding through the blinds in soft, golden ribbons. But in the pause between shirts you reached for a sweater, hers. Still there. Still folded neatly. Still smelling faintly of lavender and the ghost of her. And something inside you cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Cracked like old wood in winter. Quiet, steady, final. You clutched that sweater like it held breath. Like if you pressed it close enough it would exhale her name. Like you could bring her back in threads and scent and muscle memory. But she didn't come back. Of course she didn't. And in that moment it wasn't even about her. It was about everything that had gone unsaid. The way your heart had whispered through the months. This isn't love, not the kind that holds. But you stayed anyway. Because she called it love. And you needed it to be. Because when you grow up queer in a world that taught you love is conditional, you'll often take whatever shape you're given just to be seen. You thought being wanted was enough. Even when wanted meant walking on eggshells. Even when wanted meant apologizing for crying. Even when wanted meant shrinking every time her voice turned sharp behind closed doors. But the truth is, love without safety is performance. And you performed beautifully. You were the perfect partner. Soft-spoken. Forgiving. Always trying to understand. Until there was nothing left to understand but this. You had mistaken survival for devotion. You clutched that sweater for a long time. Too long. Like maybe grief needed a physical object. Like maybe you could anchor all your unspoken mourning into a sleeve. But then you folded it slowly, carefully, reverently. Not because you forgave her. Not yet. But because your healing deserved space she no longer filled. You placed the sweater into a donation bag. Along with the things that made you forget your own softness. The books she rolled her eyes at. The candles you stopped lighting because she said they gave her headaches. The playlist you built around her moods. You let it go. Not because it didn't hurt, but because holding it was hurting you more. This is the thing no one tells you about heartbreak. Sometimes the deepest grief isn't when someone leaves. It's when you realize they never really saw you. And you let them love you anyway. You accepted breadcrumbs and named them feasts. You called the ache romantic. You let the slow erosion of self be the cost of companionship. But now you know. Now you see it. And once you see it you cannot unsee it. You walked to the mirror that day and looked at yourself fully, maybe for the first time in months. You looked at the shadows beneath your eyes, the softness returning to your cheeks, the strength beneath the scars. And for a second you grieved the version of you who stayed, the one who begged to be chosen, the one who thought being too sensitive was a flaw. You placed your hand over your heart, felt it beating steady present yours, and then came the truth you never said out loud before. She was never mine and still, I mourned her like home. Because queer heartbreak doesn't always look like breakups. Sometimes it looks like slow, invisible disappearances. Sometimes it looks like doing laundry and realizing you miss someone who never really made space for your wholeness. But there is power in noticing. There is power in naming. There is power in deciding that your softness is not a weakness. It's your divinity. And now, you walk forward not because it doesn't hurt anymore, but because you've chosen yourself in the aftermath. You've chosen to rebuild, to reroute, to believe that tenderness deserves to be met, not manipulated. This is not a story of her. This is a story of return. And you are already on your way home.